In 2013, a Texas courtroom delivered a verdict that should not have been possible. A black woman was convicted of murder. There was nobody there, no eyewitnesses, no forensic evidence, not even proof that a crime had ever occurred. It was the kind of conviction that made defense attorneys stop mid-sentence, journalists reread court transcripts twice, and true crime followers ask a single, uncomfortable question. How does a murder conviction happen when there is no murder? This is one of those cases where every answer creates a new mystery, and by the end, nothing, absolutely nothing, looks the way it did at the beginning. The woman at the center of this case will be called Monique Johnson, a name changed to protect privacy. Monique was 32 years old, a single mother, a night shift healthcare aide. She lived in a small Texas town where reputations traveled faster than facts, and everyone believed they knew everyone else. She had no criminal record, no political connections, no money for a high-powered legal defense. What she did have was a complicated relationship with her boyfriend, Derek Wells, and a final argument that would later be reframed as a motive for murder, because Derek vanished, and when he did, the town demanded an explanation. Derek was last seen in the late summer of 2012. He didn't show up for work, he stopped answering calls, his social media accounts went silent. At first, no one panicked. Derek had a pattern of disappearing, sometimes for days at a time. Friends described him as restless, unsettled, someone who talked about leaving town and starting over more than once. But days turned into weeks, weeks turned into fear, and fear turned into suspicion. When police questioned Monique, she didn't deny the argument. She explained it calmly. Money stress, trust issues, the same arguments millions of couples have every day. According to her, Derek stormed out and said he needed space. The police wrote it down. Then they circled it, because in true crime investigations, the last person to see someone alive is rarely treated as a witness. They are treated as suspects. What followed should have ended the case, but instead it became the foundation for everything that went wrong. Police searched Monique's apartment. No blood, no signs of a struggle, no weapon. They searched nearby woods. Nothing. They drained ponds. Nothing. They checked hospitals, jails, shelters. Nothing. There was no crime scene. There was nobody there. And there was no evidence, not even circumstantial, that Derek Wells was dead. But instead of stopping, the investigation narrowed, and it narrowed directly onto Monique. Detectives began dissecting her statements line by line, not because they contradicted evidence, but because they didn't match perfectly with each other. When timelines shifted slightly, when memory faltered under repeated questioning, they labeled it deception. One officer noted that Monique did not display the expected level of emotion. Another described her as too calm. Too calm. In the history of true crime, few phrases have done more damage. Neighbors were questioned. One neighbor remembered hearing yelling but couldn't say when. Another thought they saw Monique cleaning her car late at night. There was no blood, no stains, no forensic testing, just cleaning. Police labeled it suspicious behavior. Meanwhile, Derek's phone records revealed something strange. His phone pinged miles away days after his disappearance. Instead of treating this as evidence that Derek was alive, investigators dismissed it. They argued the phone had been moved deliberately to mislead them. By who? They never said. They never proved it. With no evidence, no body, and no witnesses, the state did what it could. It built a story. Prosecutors claimed Monique killed Derek during an argument, disposed of his body in an unknown location, and erased every trace of the crime. How did she do it? They didn't explain. Where was the body? They didn't know. When did it happen? They couldn't agree, but they leaned on one powerful idea. People don't just vanish. They told the jury to use common sense, and according to the state, common sense meant only one thing: Monique must be guilty. At trial, the defense focused on the obvious: no body, no forensic evidence, no eyewitnesses, no confession. They presented Derek's history of disappearing, testimony that he talked about starting a new life elsewhere. But the prosecution didn't rely on facts, they relied on emotion. They showed photos of Derek smiling, they described the pain of his family, and they focused relentlessly on Monique herself: how she spoke, how she sat, how she reacted. Then came the final blow: a jailhouse informant. A man facing his own criminal charges claimed Monique had hinted that she had done something terrible. There was no recording, no written statement, no corroboration, just his words. And somehow it was enough. In 2013, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Monique Johnson was sentenced to decades in prison for a murder no one could prove had ever happened. The case faded from the headlines, and the system moved on. Years later, someone looked again. A private investigator reviewing cold cases noticed something buried deep in the file: a lead police had dismissed, a financial record. Derek Wells's name appeared on a temporary labor contract out of state months after his supposed death. At first, authorities assumed fraud until fingerprints were checked. They matched. Derek Wells wasn't dead. He had walked away. The discovery detonated the case. Appeals were filed, journalists reopened the investigation, civil rights organizations demanded explanations. Prosecutors scrambled, suggesting identity theft, but they couldn't explain the fingerprints, employment records, or surveillance footage from a job site hundreds of miles away. Eventually, denial became impossible. Derek Wells had abandoned his life, and Monique had lost hers because of it. Monique was released after years behind bars. There was no apology, no public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no accountability. The conviction was quietly vacated. The same system that had confidently declared her guilty now corrected itself in a whisper. Derek was never charged. Authorities cited lack of intent and closed the matter. Monique walked out of prison older, traumatized, and permanently changed. This case is not just about one woman. It's about what happens when assumptions replace evidence, when demeanor becomes proof, when common sense outweighs facts, and when the justice system values certainty over truth, especially when the defendant is poor, female, and black. The lesson is uncomfortable, but necessary. A conviction does not always mean justice, and sometimes the most dangerous thing in a courtroom isn't a weapon, it's a certainty without proof.